All right. Good morning again, everyone. We thank you all for being here this morning. We appreciate your time being here and your thoughtfulness in engaging in this conversation that we hope will be very insightful to you all. We do have our lovely panel here with us that I'd love to introduce. We have one of them who unfortunately is not able to be here at this moment, but will hopefully join us very soon. But we do have present with us Michael Harville, who works for the counseling services here at CSUB. We do have Professor Gibson, who works here at CSUB teaching gender and gender-related courses here on campus. We do have Jason Watkins, who works at Services for Students with Disabilities. And then we do have Samantha De La Cruz, who is our president of the Club Gen club here at CSUB. So if you can give him a round of applause for being here today. Thank you, thank you. And we do have Vanessa Corona, who is our other panel member. She'll be here hopefully before the film ends, and she'll be here for the discussion. She's our campus advocate here for domestic violence, sexual assault, and that type of work here on campus. And she's located also at the Magic Center, which is in Housing West again. At this moment, I'd like to invite our panel members to go ahead and step onto the back and serve themselves some Panda Express before our film begins. Once our panel members have the opportunity to kind of serve themselves a plate, you're all invited to also serve yourselves a plate so that we can start our film. And then we also have, while they serve themselves, we also have Teresita Overdoing, who is a really big help here at the CSUB library. She's one of our librarians, and she also has some opening remarks regarding the other table adjacent to the food table.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Danny. Again, I want to welcome you to the Walter W. Stern Library. This event is part of our Walter Presents series, featuring events and programs covering a wide array of topics. Our next program is a health screening happening here in the December Reading Room on Friday at 10 o'clock, so we welcome you to come back and participate in that. We have really been looking forward to this event. It's our first collaboration with Magic. This documentary explores the experience of masculinity in America and what it means for our society. After viewing the film and discussing the issues with our panelists, we hope you continue to explore this topic using the library's resources. We have several books on the topic, some of which are displayed in the back of the room. Please feel free to check them out. There are also reading lists. I see several of you have already grabbed a copy, so please feel free to grab a copy of the reading list. The reading list also has a link to our online guide for the topic, which lists additional books and articles. And lastly, I'd like to point out our gender studies librarian, Andrea Anderson. She's in the back of the room next to the book table. If you'd like to explore more in-depth resources on the topic, please feel free to contact her or, of course, any of the librarians here at the library. All right, thank you very much.
So thank you again, Teresita, and thank you to Andrea. I also did want to introduce you all to our other graduate student leader. His name is Jose Lopez, and he's our other graduate intern at Magic. Jose, give him a wave. And he also works as one of the interns at the Multicultural Center with us. It looks like our panel members are still serving themselves a plate. So a couple minutes, and then once they're ready and they're good to go, we'll go ahead and invite everyone else to go ahead and serve themselves a plate.
Hello. Okay, so at this time, I'm going to ask the panelists to please come forward into the tables. And then we're going to go ahead and get started with a couple of questions that I already have set up. And then from there, we're going to open it to the floor in case any of you have any additional questions that would you like to ask. Then we can go ahead and do that.
Me. I'm the panel.
Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and wait for... And then, before we get started, I would just like to, it's not on, right?
It should be on.
The light is on, but it's not. It doesn't, no.
Improvise.
Hello? No? How about that? Okay, so before we get started with the panel, I would like to thank whoever's watching on the live stream. And, you know, it was a great film. I hope all of you enjoyed it. And it was a lot of information. So I hope you have a lot of questions. If not, then I guess I can come up with some of them. I don't know about all of y'all, but I kind of shed a little tear in, you know, some of the scenes. It was a little emotional. And it's definitely an issue that, you know, it's going around, and now that we're in today's era, it's just something that needs to be spoken about, because, you know, a lot of people go through this and they struggle with finding who they are and having been stuck in the box that, you know, the man box that they mentioned at the end. And society not allowing men to go outside that box. And if you do go outside the box, then you're going to be, you know, made fun of, or going to call you a feminine guy, or all those derogatory terms that they say. So now that the panel is here, and unfortunately Vanessa Corona, she's still on her way. Hopefully she'll be able to join us within a couple of minutes. But in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and get started. And again, just to reintroduce the panelists, I'll have them just introduce themselves and just kind of say what they do on campus and just a little about themselves. Okay. Still your mic. No.
Hi, I'm Dr. Michael Harville. I'm a clinical psychologist and one of the counselors in the counseling center. So probably most of my day is spent providing mental health treatment to students on campus. I'm also the coordinator for our LGBTQ+ Safe Zone Ally program on campus as well.
Hi, I'm Professor Kristen Gibson. I'm a lecturer in sociology, and in our department I teach the bulk of the gender courses. So my day is spent teaching, and I see a few of my students here today. Thanks.
My name is Jason Watkins. I work in services for students with disabilities. I also lecture part-time for the psych department. In addition to that, I'm involved with the food insecurity on campus, and I try to stay active in terms of suicide prevention, some issues that are close to me in terms of college students.
Hello, I'm Samantha De La Cruz. I am the Club Gen president here on campus, which stands for Gender Equality Now. So it is something we, you know, continuously try to achieve on and off campus, along with queer issues and sexuality issues.
Okay, thank you, panelists, for that. And if you have any questions that you don't feel like asking in front of the panel and you want to ask them individually, you're more than welcome to at the end of the event. So to get started off, this is the question I would like to pose on to the panel, which is, given the present film, why do you believe that maybe boys and men are asked to put on the mask and hide emotion? Whoever feels like they can take that one. If not, you're gonna be a professor, we're gonna pick on you.
I can start off. It's something that we've normalized over time. You know, we see things as very black and white. You know, so we see, like, you know, boys and girls, and, you know, masculine and femininity, and it's just, you know, what we're accustomed to growing up. It's with the little comments they make, you know, like, oh, you know, toughen up, or, you know, suck it up, and it's something that, you know, they're, you know, put in, you know, what they say, the man box. It is something that they grow up thinking they have to fit into, and then that doesn't, you know, leave over time, because it is something that just builds and builds and builds and builds through the different institutions they go into. So whether it's school, you know, activities such as sports, or even if, you know, they're in music class, it's something where even the slightest comment can put them back into that box and feel like they'd have to adhere to it. And, you know, even for people who, you know, are LGBT, so, you know, trans men, they feel that they have to, you know, go and adhere to these issues, because, you know, they're like, I have to present myself as masculine, I want to pass, so I have to embody these things even if they're toxic in order to be validated. And that's another thing, you know, they want to be validated, they want to be viewed of high status. High status is something that they really value. And so it's just, you know, how am I going to be accepted? And, you know, if this is what's tied to success and everything we see as good, then obviously I'm going to have to put on that mask and wear that mask and pretend that I at least enjoy it, even if I am, like, suffering underneath it.
Right, and I also think part of the problem is in this culture we've conflated the terms sex and gender. So as the documentary mentioned, right, sex is biological, right, XX, XY, but oftentimes people also see gender as being natural and they don't see it as being socially constructed. And so if you do not necessarily view something as being a construction and therefore it can be deconstructed, right, it definitely creates their pressure that you behave in such a way because you feel like this is the natural way to behave, that it isn't just what is expected of you, it really is, this is what boys are, this is what men are, not this is kind of what society has constructed for men or boys to be. So not really being able to distinguish between those two terms and treating them interchangeably, I think also just contributes to that pressure to behave in this very limited way that we've defined as masculinity at this time point.
Okay, that's very good. And then just for the last part, with either Jason or Michael, I'd like to touch on why are we asked to hide emotions when it comes to men?
I think a psychologist can answer
that. You want me to take is that mine? Why? You know, for the most part, for what's being expected, often I think it's highly functional. It's required. The role that men are offered is we are trained to be violent and to kill. That is one of our major roles. I think that there's a real militaristic component to what boys are being trained to do. There's an expectation of survival and that men are in charge of protection and survival, and that is going to involve violence and death. And to attack another person, to kill another person is extremely difficult to do. There's a cost to it, and there's a great deal of fear that comes with that. And if you don't deaden those feelings at some level, I don't know that people are able to go in and approach those very dangerous situations. So I think from a very young age, it's been part of our culture to prepare boys to go out and to do that sort of behavior. And you can't let into the fear, or you can't care about the enemy. You have to be able to go out and harm, and that really is a deadening of feelings. You can't talk about how scared you are or how bad you feel about those things, or that some of the behavior you did was wrong and that you're feeling guilty or sad about that. It's kind of this idea of you just go out and you did it and it was the right thing to do and nobody better challenge or ask me about it either. And that's kind of what you want to project to the world. And if you don't project that to the world, I think boys are very directly taught. I don't know that they naturally take that role on, but if you don't do it, you are punished. You are ostracized at some level.
Yeah, that's very true. A lot of the issues that they're going through, whether it's your emotions or it is just fitting in or anything like that, can take a toll on the person, regardless whether it's a female or a male. And then right now, I'm just going to take a time really quick to introduce Vanessa Corona. She just came in. She's our last panelist, and to go on from there, then what do you think it will be some good ways to foster a environment where it's safe for men to, remove that mask and share their feelings?
So, I think one of the challenges that they speak to is the assumption that an all-male environment is going to foster that type of feelings. That's just not necessarily true, right? So they point out like one of the most toxic environments can be like professional sports or sports teams or fraternities. And so I think that's part of the challenge, right? Is because this is something that I feel like was largely not discussed. I graduated college in '03. I was a women's studies major when it was just called women's studies. And I literally learned nothing about masculinity. Like their masculinity studies did not exist. Michael Kimmel hadn't really come on the scene. Jackson Katz wasn't really writing about it. And so if you think about, I'm in my 30s, it really is gonna have to be something that's almost student-led, Generation Z led in some ways. I feel like even as recent as my generation. A lot of these men are still hurting. They're still trapped in the mask. And it's kind of concerning, because I think about the men I know who are teachers, who are Scouts leaders, who are coaches, and I know them to be good men, but you know, are they giving boys the tools to break outside of the masculinity box? I would probably guess no, because that's not something that they were explicitly taught or learned. Like, this still feels very natural to them. And so, you know, as far as what can be done to kind of create an environment, you know, looking to students creating these spaces, and certainly having, you know, adults facilitate when needed, but giving them the tools and resources to kind of create these safe spaces for themselves, I think is key, and hopefully that the message will spread to older generations slowly and surely as well.
And I agree with the point about it, that needs to be sort of, that students have a really big role, or young people have a big role. But I also think we have a big responsibility to model that, those of us in education, those of us working with youth. I know in the students that I work with, I see a lot of it, they're kind of looking to me to see what's okay, and questions will be asked, and depending on, you know, do you feel emotional about this? Does this make you sad? And I know that in my experience, just sharing with them, you know, I had this happen and I was very sad, or yeah, this made me cry. There's almost this sort of disbelief followed by this, like, oh, okay, it's okay. So I think it's twofold, but I think coming to things like this and having these discussions, and then now go from here, go out into the world and sort of do something with it, right? Don't tell people to man up and act like a man and all that kind of crap, right? I think there's some element to we have to do something with it.
I think kind of adding to that, you all came to college to become woke, right? I mean, that's why you're here. And so you have a really unique opportunity that many of you have younger siblings or cousins at home, that you have that opportunity again to model that behavior, but also to be able to say, hey, it's all right. You know, when they don't want to play football, but instead they want to be an artist or do music or any of these things, you have that opportunity to say, hey, that's all right. There are tons of things that you can do as a man or as a woman, and it's not just being a firefighter or a cop or any of these other things that we've sort of boxed people in from a very young age. So again, it's starting with you all. You're learning about it, and so you get to say, hey, it's all right. And if you have questions about it, let me know. I can stick up for you. Be that ally. Be that person to have their back.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely true, especially for, you know, we still live in this era where a lot of us have been conditioned into being, you know, the masculinity box and being in there. So a lot of the times we've already been preconditioned, and we ourselves have to fight that, and we have to come out of that box and be okay with that, and, you know, spread that to everybody else. So I need to first ourselves be okay with that and be the person that we want to portray and help break the cycle from. And
can I add one?
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's funny, in talking about the box, and they portrayed it in the film, I did a similar exercise in one of my classes where we talked about what did it mean. We did one for, you know, what did it mean to be a man, what did it mean to be a woman. But we're going to look at the man box, right, and all the qualities that fall into that. And then if you're not that, what are the things that it makes you, and all the derogatory terms, right? One of the things that stood out is, if you're called one of those, then what do you do to get back into the man box? You're violent, you're aggressive, right? So it just continues that sort of narrative, that cycle, that if I am outside of the box, I can just be aggressive, or I can fight someone, or I can sort of double down on it, and it gets me back in there. So I think that, you know, the way at the end where he kind of took those barriers off, I thought that was really, really helpful.
Yeah, and then you guys already kind of touched base on my next question, which would be, what are some activities or initiatives that we can do in order to help this issue? I know Professor Gibson mentioned it has to be more of a student-led, that we need to take care on that. In the film, we saw that most of the programs that they were on were because they were already in prison or they were in gang. So now we have to take that and not do it as a, you know, people who are violent, but just do it in the population in general. So is there any additional things that you think might be a good thing to do on campuses?
I mean, just like the basic exercises they did in the film, you know, where it's just like, hey, I have a piece of paper with a mask on it. I can do this group exercise and we can talk about it. I know we've had them on campus, you know, about like stress and anxiety and, you know, having that toolbox to deal with it. And even if we just have those on campus, it's a good start. You know, maybe only 4 people show up, but that's 4 more people that are getting helped than before. And then, word gets out and it can manifest from there. And when we have these events, it's, fostering those environments where this can just, we can begin a cycle of deconstructing. Because as Professor Gibson has said, it's, a construct that can be deconstructed and go from there.
Call one another out. When you see somebody or hear somebody saying or doing something inappropriate, that is your job as an active bystander to say, hey, that's not cool. Or how would you like it if someone was saying those things to you, right? To see these larger issues that are taking place because of what people think are very small little words or actions. It's not. We've normalized these things so much that we don't know how toxic they've become. So because you're here and because you're learning all of these things, it's okay to stand up, speak up, say something about it.
Right, and not even waiting necessarily for it to be like the super, obscene joke or the derogatory slur. When I was on my way to class like a couple of weeks ago, there were a group of guys standing around laughing, taking pictures, and I was like, oh, what's going on? Perhaps free food. But it was not free food. It was apparently one of them had lost a bet, and so he was dressed up like a woman wearing makeup, and all of his friends were joining around, laughing and pointing it out, and he had a sign saying, I lost a bet. And that's not necessarily the same thing as using a slur, but think about what that's suggesting, right? What gives the masculinity box power is because the femininity box is treated like this second-tier, low-status position to be in. So it is, if you're not in this box, you're in this box, and this box definitely is the box that sucks in society, right? And so that's why this works as a form of shaming, because literally the opposite doesn't exist in this society. When have you seen a group of women like, hey, you lost a bet, wear a hoodie and some jeans, and then stand, like it literally doesn't even make sense, because one box, although it's horrible to be trapped in boxes, right? But we've also given one box more power and status. So not even necessarily waiting for like the really like controversial statements or jokes or things that people maybe do, but just calling people like on the small crap, right? Because that's kind of what rape culture is the idea that there are a bunch of things at the bottom that don't seem that serious, but they contribute to these things that happen at the very top. And so one of those things at the bottom can easily be, people having their friends stand around in women's clothes to make fun of him as a loss of a bet.
Yeah, that's definitely correct. Does anybody else have anything to say without question?
You asked, it's not so much a specific program, but I think we want young boys and young people, for that matter in general, to be able to feel vulnerable. And I think one of the ways we do that is we are vulnerable, can't say that word, vulnerable ourselves. And I think sort of our own vulnerability will prompt others. And I think so it's more a way of being, maybe, than just a specific program.
Mm-hmm. I'm a big fan of being the change you want to see in the world. In my experience, well, with masculinity, because in my experience that I've worked with plenty of women who are pretty masculine, and they struggle with this just as much as the men do, as far as that goes. In terms of being able to connect and talk about your feelings, to be open about that, I think very much in the film, there's a clear examples of how men are taught one way, and really the other aspects are kept from them. They're not allowed to practice or experience any of that. But my experience is men, masculine individuals, can learn this just as well as anyone. You think poets and artists, writers, they're plumbing the depths of humanity and feeling and emotion, that they're more than capable, but they have to have the space, the opportunity, and the belief that in some way that's going to be valuable and that they're not going to be punished. So to me, this is hopefully an environment, and I think that for most people, this is one environment probably for the first time in their life where they can truly start to explore some of these ideas and experiences in a way that is reasonably safe. I don't know that the college campus is perfectly safe, but it is probably much more safe than most places you're going to find out in the community. And starting to create change within yourself, and I think that when other people see the change in you, if they see that as something positive, very often they want what you've got. so often when people come to counseling, they've thought that it's totally worthless. Everybody's told them it's worthless. They know they don't want to come and talk about feelings. But then somebody else they know went to counseling and they got better. And it's like, what have you been doing? That seems pretty good. Maybe I'll try that. And that kind of draws them in. And often that can be a really powerful agent for change as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a good thing. A lot of the time counseling, people see like, oh, I'm not crazy, I'm not going to go, I don't need it. But I feel like anybody else needs a little counseling in their lives. So this takes me to the last question before we go into any questions from you people out there. And that would be, do you believe that problem will ever be fully dissolved?
This is a tough question, specifically because there are so many other components that maybe we haven't really touched on. So communities of color, number one. So we have, Latino communities, African American communities. Every culture comes with its own set of stereotypes and beliefs and all of this that we have to live up to, right? And that's adding a whole nother layer. So now we're not just talking about females and males and or other, we're talking about a whole nother thing. You want to eradicate the total culture. You can't do that, right? So until we are able to really teach people that, hey, we also need to be examining how we're raising our children or how we're growing up or what we're accepting in our own households, I think it's going to be really difficult to do so.
Right, I agree. It is, as Vanessa said, eradicating a whole culture seems like a really daunting task. So, just to specifically at least think of some concrete things that we would like to start with or some things we would like to work on within the masculinity box, I think is key. I saw something, there's a program in the UK where in elementary schools and 4th, 5th grade classrooms, they have classroom babies. People literally volunteer to bring their babies to these classrooms once a week because they've learned that interacting with babies and puppies helps generate empathy in all individuals. And what they found is because this is a time period where you start to see a switch in young men, right? And they mentioned that in the documentary as they're going into this pre-middle school time, being able to interact with the baby, having this safe space to coo and gurgle and not have people make fun of you is kind of key, right? So at least in the UK where they don't have nearly the same level of problem that we have with things like mass violence, starting maybe just with empathy, right? And like Vanessa suggested, it would be at least one good place to start breaking up the masculinity box or the mask.
Okay, anybody else have anything else to add on to that?
There's a question out there.
Okay, we can go ahead and move on to the questions, and then we can come back to that one in case any of you had a similar question. I'll go ahead and go up to you because we don't have another mic. So if you have a question, I'll go up to you, and then we can go ahead and go from there. So Alexandria, you have a question?
Yes, I do. I'm watching this video because I watched it before the viewing. One of the reasons why I decided to come to college to study psychology was one for that purpose, because I believe that there should be a psychology for men. I know that there was a study started in 1993 based on why do men do violence against women, which prompted this one gentleman to start writing books on a psychology of men. And I think that it's been in the background since 1993, and he's won tons of awards, tons of scholarly writings, different things like that. His name, of course, would escape me at this moment. But in that you were talking about a safe place, is it plausible to say that there needs to be a psychology for men, because there isn't, and there's a psychology for almost anything else pretty much. I mean, specifically catered to the male population, in which you can deal with those type of norms as far as cultural things and other things, other aspects, other stereotypes that they might face. And the reason being is because, you know how that saying goes, boys don't cry, but with gender norms being pushed and stretched and things being moved, it's not that boys don't cry, it's men do cry, boys do cry, and it's okay. So I guess my question is, how would you go about setting up a safe place for like a men's like group counseling? Because what I've found in counseling and being a patient of counseling is that it's a lot easier when you know that you're not the only one that's going through these issues or that exemplify these feelings, I guess.
So it sounds like it's geared more towards Michael, but any of the other panelists are more than welcome to add anything. And she has 2 questions, so that would be, is it necessary for it to be a psychology for men? And the other one, which will be, how can you create a safe space in a counseling environment when it comes to masculinity as the issue?
I think having studies, examining, finding out what will allow men to feel safe, what are things that are more effective with them, is certainly valuable. My pause, the reason I'm thinking is a lot of what we have, it turns out that men are human beings, and a lot of what goes on in counseling, in therapy, is about humanity. And connecting people to their humanity goes a long way to heal these issues. So a lot of what we know, I think, works for both men and women, for masculine and feminine, for a variety of sexual orientations, religions, the various experiences. There is so much commonality, and much of that works. But I think that there are obviously within various experiences of humanity, being able to go to where they are and understanding their very particular view on the world is important. And if you don't feel like that person really understands your experience, very often it's hard to open up. And so certainly being able to understand kind of the male and masculine experience and be able to kind of meet them where they are, certainly in situations, I think, in very kind of male-dominated areas, say like the military, there are some attempts to kind of figure out how can we get men together in a group, talking, kind of discussing things like brotherhood, that sort of connection, and giving permission to express feelings is really important. But I would say that one of the difficulties oftentimes is that just the entire process of counseling is not considered very masculine as a thing to do. There are plenty of men that enjoy the process, that can take advantage of it. Men do cry. I can certainly back that up. I don't know that they want anybody to know about it either. There's a great deal of shame associated with that. In finding some methods that maybe feel more congruent with who they are, I think is definitely always an ongoing approach.
Right, like finding out that because you cry doesn't take away from your masculinity or femininity. It just means that, you are a human being. That's the reason, again, the reason why I asked was because of that particular person. Because I am interested in actually creating a psychology for them. Because of recent violence and different things, and stereotypes tied in with those, and actions taken by certain people. You got to look at when was the last time that men, as far as criminals, as far as criminology speaking, as far as what is leading to these mass shootings, what is leading to a lot of different violence. Is it maybe because they're not able to express themselves? Is it because of the anxiety forced on by, just a simple word of masculinity and the conditioning and the training received from childhood, and depending on all those other, different contributing aspects and just different things like that. How can we shine a light on it saying, hey, it's not the 60s, the 70s, or the 80s, maybe we need to go back and look at this instead of giving just a section and an area where you're talking about like serial killers or just different things. They only have a portion as far as that in terms of like psychology and different aspects. That's what I'm asking. How can we branch away just from that and not it just being, okay, we just identified them with, like you said, hunters, providers. People will be affirming their masculinity by either causing other types of
So if I could just insert here, this is why I always think it's a great idea when you're in the social sciences to take other classes outside of just your primary department. A lot of what you're speaking to is sociology, right? When you say how people grow up, that's socialization. When you talk about behavioral expectations, that's norms. And I'm always really happy when students take a diverse range of courses in psychology and sociology, in CJ, that think a lot of the things that we talk about are the same and we approach them differently. So in sociology, we have a wealth of literature that speaks to that, right? I mean, this whole concept of masculinity, two of the people that were in the documentary, Jackson Katz and Michael Kimmel, come out of sociology and have contributed to this idea of maybe not to like in terms of what are the intrinsic motivations as to why men do this, but certainly a lot of studies about socialization of aggressive behavior, getting the message that you don't cry, that you externalize your feelings, that you don't back down from a fight, right? That the most important thing is respect. That isn't something that people are born with. That is not an idea set that babies come out of the womb having by virtue of having, a penis. That is something that people have told them throughout their lives, beginning at age 2 or 3, that this is acceptable kind of boy behavior, and this is what we expect of men or masculinity. And that's why I think, especially when you think about things like group counseling or activities that are involved in a group, just understanding kind of the group dynamics and how it's really hard for one individual to break down norms just by themselves, right? So to really change people's minds, it has to almost be in a group setting, right? Not just so that they have a safe space, but also so that they're clear that, this is something that we're doing together. This isn't just me letting my freak flag fly. This is like 100, 200, 1,000 people saying, we are gonna reconceptualize masculinity differently in 2018 than maybe what we were doing in 1998. And so, yeah, that is something that comes up a lot in sociology, and I would suggest, Michael Kimmel as being, I saw some of the books back there, they have his name on them. He is really known for kind of these ideas about what men need in the study of masculinity studies.
Go ahead, Simon.
Hold on, I just want to add on to that a little bit, because I'm a double major in psychology and women and gender sexuality studies. And so, as for the stuff about psychology of men, I think that gender in psychology is progressing a lot. And the studies that you're talking about and the research you want to do, it's out there, but as Professor Gibson said, a lot of it is more in the sociology department, and I can give you recommendations later. Yeah, but it's something that's just like, we're finally putting words to situations that we didn't know, how to really frame or discuss. And I think just, over time, it's going to progress there. But, it's going to take students like us to, get there and really further develop it. But the information's out there. It just might not be, necessarily worded the way you're trying to, put it. So just, bear that in mind. And then, we're getting somewhere.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I see a hand back there.
Could I add something real
quick?
quick?
Go ahead, Michael.
One of the things I wanted to say about this in particular, and one of the difficulties is that a lot of men and boys, in my opinion, would be bullied and tortured into being men, that there's a deep amount of trauma that comes with masculinity, and being able to address that trauma I don't think is something that has been integrated well with men, that it's almost a desire not to address it or talk about it as an attempt to not shame them into kind of expressing that you could be hurt by something like that. And so very often isn't talked about or addressed. And very specifically, I don't know that men want to talk about it or address it because it feels deeply shameful to even admit that something like that had an impact. Your goal is to be hurt and act like nothing touched you.
Thank you much for that. So we're going to move to the next question.
Hello. One thing I was curious about, understand the importance of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation and the current society we live in. I was curious, how do we address masculinity and changing it when the current form is being rewarded? How do we actually address that? As parents want to address these issues, they teach them one thing, but then the school and everywhere else reinforces that. So how is that going to play in a contrasting role?
Okay, thank you very much. So just to reiterate his question, so that would be, parents are trying to break the cycle and trying to teach their kids the proper way of, you can express yourself whatever the way you are. But on the other hand, you have the schools or society in general still putting in those old ways of masculinity. So how do we beat that as parents or people of society?
That's a super great question, Anthony, and no, it really is. It really is, because if you think about it, even when we're talking about dress codes, right? We are teaching women or young girls, I should say, from such a young age that they need to police their bodies, right? That what if they have is something that they should either be ashamed of or that isn't for them to share with anyone, until they're married and all this, right? So you're talking about a parent trying to change that, but then there's this institution that isn't allowing for these things, and that's where that institutional change needs to come. And like Jason had mentioned before, that starts with each and every one of you in this room. If I continue to bring it up and another parent does and another student does, then that might force them to take a look at things and say, hey, maybe the way that we're doing things isn't right. Or maybe we do need to go back to the basics. But it is going to take pushback. Is it going to happen overnight? Absolutely not. It's something that each and every one of us up here on this panel has at one point, dealt with and is still dealing with every day. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. We definitely still have incentives for this kind of traditional masculinity, both in our interpersonal interactions and just culturally, so how do we change that? And it can start in the home, but it is definitely going to take some institutional changes, both in schools and in larger institutions. You see some colleges, especially in regards to like fraternities and sports teams, instituting some pretty rigorous, no tolerance policies around things related to sexual assaults and hate crimes directed towards people in the LGBTQ population. And I hate to say I think it's going to have to be punitive for a while, but I think that part of that is probably going to be some punitive policies as we're kind of forcibly making people unlearn some of the things that they have been taught for years, while still trying to create some incentives for this kind of new type of masculinity, at the same time. And I agree with Vanessa. Once again, I think on college campuses, a good amount of this is probably going to be student-based, just some self-policing and some just mirroring the, being the change that you want to see. But I am a proponent for institutions taking policies, making it clear that, we have a no-tolerance environment, that this boys will be boys, words don't hurt you, that type of stuff I feel like definitely needs to be left in the past. And I feel like at least on this campus with Claudia Katota, we have a very active Title IX office that takes these types of complaints very seriously when they arise. I feel like that is at least a very good start.
Mm-hmm. To me, I agree. I think that is the question. Oh no, it's because at the same time, you can't send people out into a world that's going to punch them in the face. At the same time, I was just, on Saturday, I was watching Chris Rock's last comedy special. And to me, a lot of things, this is a very prominent black man that people love. And he was saying, essentially, he was mad about bullying policies because he felt like bullies did half the work in school. The teachers taught you half, but bullies were doing at least the other half to prepare you to go out in the world and deal with what is going to happen. He He's talking about his 2 African-American daughters, and he sits down and looks them in the face and says, no one outside this door cares about you. You are meaningless outside this door. And his other statement was, and I don't have a boy, thank goodness, but if you do, if you don't punch that boy in the face every morning, that is child abuse. Now, there was comedy, he was joking, but I think that he was trying to speak to some sort of truth the way he felt, like in terms of the amount of preparation you have to provide somebody to go out into a world that is out to harm them. And I don't know. To me, we have to find a way to make the world safe that once you start letting down in some aspects of your life, I think that people understand there's a fear that you will let down in some of these other environments that will literally hurt and kill you. And I think that for most people, this is a very dangerous world still. We have safe pockets, but we have children being shot in school, and I don't know, there's a real debate on whether we can even talk about that publicly. Sexual assault is rampant. Child sexual abuse is rampant. And I don't know that these are things that are really discussed or talked about. And so one of the ways that we manage is not fix it, but just blunt our feelings around it and allow the trauma to happen. And then hopefully you've buried that deep enough to flow through. So to me, we have to constantly find that balance. My belief is that this world is safer and better on some of these issues. I think my experience of the world versus what my father talked about, I think that my experience versus what I think the opportunities that students now have is very different. It is getting better to some degree, but it is slow changes, and only when that is truly safe and encouraged. We have to believe that this is important enough and speak that to the world, and back it up. And in so many ways, I think in our policies and the way we treat people, I don't feel like we've backed it up very well.
And I just want to add, because Anthony is one of my students, I teach sociology of gender and society once a semester, a upper level, a lower level. Class is about 45 now that it's the semester system. I never have more than 5 guys. In this current class, in Anthony's class, there are technically 3 on roster, 2 show regularly. And so, you know, once again, I don't think there is some magic institutional policy here, but really just looking at, you know, this is a GE. There are a lot of things that could fulfill this requirement. Why are men just consistently like, yeah, no, I'm gonna pass on gender and society, you know, when they are the other half of the class, I think is important. I don't have any ideas. If anyone has any, please feel free to share them with me after the end of this panel. But you know, just once again, just kind of selling this idea that this class is meant for you. This discussion involves you, that gender inequity isn't just a women's issue, that gender norms isn't just a women's issue, and finding a way to really get that message out there so it's not falling off on deaf ears, I think could at least go a little bit of a way of introducing people to a new way of approaching things, thinking of things.
And I think piggybacking off of that comment, a lot of young men that come to see me when it comes to sexual misconduct will always say, well, you're bashing us, right? You're bashing us males, and that's not what we want. We want you all, again, like you mentioned, you are a large part of this conversation, and actually you are the ones that can change that peer-to-peer education, me calling my bros out on this kind of stuff, or my teammates, or whatever people say now. You know, you are that person, like Michael said, you are that change that can happen. So again, without taking these classes and learning more, you're not becoming part of that solution. So you are going to continue to feel attacked if you're not making that change.
I want to support that I think that very often men get a very clear message that they are bad, that they are the cause, they are the problem, that they are violent and dangerous rapists, and that is the message that you, and you don't want to go into it, nobody wants to go into an environment where that's essentially what you think that you're going to be getting thrown at you. I think being able to include, and to me some of the psychology of men is really about men and masculinity. Both of those have fantastic traits. They're amazing. They're extremely valuable, and I don't know that that's talked about. Really, it's very quickly and easy to pick out what are the negatives, what are the problems that are being caused, but I don't think that there is much discussion about what is good about being male or masculine.
Yeah, for sure. And then, one of the things will be maybe acceptance. Like, Anthony asked, how can we protect, our kids if we want to send them out into the world? And Michael mentioned, you don't want to, be them being hurt out in the world if you're teaching them to be a certain way, and society doesn't accept that. But maybe just if society started teaching everybody to be accepting and understand people who come from different backgrounds and everything, I think that would be probably the key for that. But we have another question right here.
Thank you, Jose. So some of the key details that I had noticed during this presentation, and as well as in the panel, is how our youth are being affected by our culture and what we're seeing in the media, the video games that are being given to kids at an age far too that they shouldn't even be playing those games. And I feel like there's a big problem in our society that's giving our children, our male children, these ideas of masculinity, where the main combatant force to that is here in education on our college campuses, where you're talking about, it's a safe environment, where you're talking about you're bringing babies into junior highs and letting the kids be just kind of babble and go on. And I feel that there's a big connection to allowing our youth to experiment with who they are as people. But because of these prevailing cultural norms, it seems very difficult, because if any of our youth step outside of this masculinity boxes we've been talking about, then they're shamed for that, or they're bullied for that. And I just want to know your guys' thoughts on what can we do to improve the ability for our youth to experiment with their masculinity in our culture.
Okay, so pretty straightforward question. What can we do to help the current teenagers and kids to explore their masculinity and just who they are as a person?
It goes back to just, validation. Validating, the fact that they're growing up, they're developing, and, masculinity is not inherently bad, just like femininity is not inherently bad. It's, when it starts getting to toxic masculinity, where it's promoting aggression or, sexual violence, those type of things where it gets really bad. But just validating, hey, you're growing up, you don't really know who you are right now, and that's okay. And you're going to figure that out. And if you branch outside of this box that society's putting you in, that's okay too. And I think that's the main thing that you can do, is just, being there to listen, support, and validate them. And that's for, whether they're a boy or a girl, LGBT, anything like that. It's just, society has a box for you and wants you to be in that box. But if you branch out of that box, you're okay. It's just, creating that nurturing, safe environment for them, no matter what.
And I think this is where kind of promoting group level change could be really helpful, because it is scary and risky to step out of that box by yourself. So thinking about the types of initiatives you can put into place where instead of one person exploring masculinity, you have a group of people being able to safely explore masculinity, I think could possibly be really helpful and key. I know I've read stories about, Boy Scout leaders, instead of doing kind of more the traditional male Scout activities, right, the kind of gendered Scout activities, instead they encourage all the guys, they took a ballet class, right, to prove the point that this isn't something that you think about as being a sport or athletic, but it's really hard. Anyone that's taken ballet will, it is a skill set in and of itself. And it worked because it was 25 of them doing it, not just one of them doing it. And so once again, just thinking about what that would mean on a college campus, what you could do amongst yourselves in your groups and clubs as a group, as well as, what you can encourage on high school and middle school campuses as well at a group level. When I was in grad school, I worked for the football team for 4 years as part of paying the bills. And one thing that one of the coaches set up during the time I was there was they would have like a roundtable session after dinner where they would go through and they would be encouraged to share how they're feeling. Are they feeling overwhelmed? Are they feeling frustrated? And when he noticed that nobody was sharing, right, because they haven't learned this skill, kind of like what the guy did in the documentary, they did a anonymous box. And he would just pluck a couple from the box. And when people didn't have to own their feelings, right, when they could just talk about them in a more anonymous light, they were able to have some good discussions about, you know, what does it mean I'm at a D1 school on a football scholarship and I'm expected to be this super athlete, but I'm really feeling very vulnerable. I'm not in small town North Carolina anymore. I'm not the star athlete, and I don't know how to act. I don't know how to respond, or, you know. So they would talk about these issues. No one was using the term masculinity yet. They just called it weekly roundup or weekly wrap up. But I remembered being like, this might be a way to get men to open up in a space that isn't necessarily safe, but an adult, certainly caring individual could make safe.
I think too, in addition to that, because I like that idea of the round table, but I think part of it, and a lot of times men, we tend to give a very short answer, right? How you doing? Good, right? How's your week? Fine, right? It's what happens. I see it in my classrooms, I see it in students I work with. Pushing it a little further, okay, why is it good? You know, getting our young men to talk more, getting them to expand their thoughts and not just settling for the one-word answers, I think is an important piece of that.
And I should add that they got pizza and they raffled off things like video games. So there was some straight bribery also.
Yep. Incentives always work.
There was some bribery involved too.
Right. I think really going a long way to redefining masculinity and openly talking about men and boys differently. What does that mean to be a boy? What do boys like? What do boys do? And giving them a few more options. Turns out that certainly as people grow up, they often finally get an opportunity to explore that, but very early on, there's as you're saying, a very restricted kind of view. Boys like football, basketball, that's what they like, right? It needs to be active and tough in sports. Like, do boys like flower arranging and poetry? You know, it turns out, yeah, they do. In fact, they can be really good at it. But I don't know that any of them are going to admit to that until they are deep into their adult life in many cases, right? So putting that out there, giving them some examples, seeing, I think having models of this is masculinity, these are men, these are people who are successful, that they're doing well, that they enjoy their life, and these are things that they're doing. People respond to that, I think, seeing it actually happen and having more examples. But I don't know that in our culture there's a broad spectrum of masculinity that is presented in movies, in TV. Right.
Okay, we might have time for one or two more questions. So I'll go ahead and go to the back, and then I'll come right to the front.
So I thought the video had a lot of really good points, but it kind of showed obvious ways that masculinity affects us, and I think that people don't realize how it affects us in more subtle ways. So I remember in a course where we talked about how divorce rates in marriages are going up, and a lot of people thought, or some people think, that that has to do with the sanctity of marriage, or, you know, all that political stuff. But actually, we talked about how since we live in a different world where you can't really have this unique type of American dream nuclear family anymore because both parents have to work, there's a lot of dissatisfaction in marriage because men sometimes feel like displaced because women are also making money, and child rearing is still seen as like the woman's responsibility. So when women aren't getting that help, it creates like tension in these relationships. And I just also think that it is good in an individual way to counter this, but I think institutions have a responsibility to counter it as well, because you don't really see real change until after institutions implement things. So in my opinion, I think that the government has a direct responsibility to counter these. So in certain ways, like in rape cases where, I forgot what his name was, but he was a swimmer and he raped an unconscious girl. and people think he got a slap on the wrist. So we see our own government kind of not take these things seriously, and I think if they did, things would change more. So I was just wondering if you guys think they have a responsibility as well to implement that change.
Okay, so does the government have responsibility to implement more change when it comes to the consequences of masculinity, in a sense, or to counter the issue?
Sorry. Yeah.
So, I guess for me, you know, you gave two great examples, but they're very different. Divorce is a tricky one. I like to tell my students when I teach family, you probably don't want to go poking and prodding around your grandparents' and great-grandparents' marriage. You may learn things that are not comfortable. I think that's something we don't want to think about, is how many women were trapped in unhappy marriages, dissatisfied marriages, because they literally could not afford to leave because they were economically dependent on a man. So to the extent that you are correct, we know that in two working household parents where they both work, they can have a higher level of dissatisfaction. Statistics show when you're looking at how they're splitting up household chores, men who have wives who work that make more money than them are less likely to do housework than men who have wives that work but make less money than them. So complicated things about gender seem to come up. I don't know if there's any magic that the government can do policy-wise to change that, besides, you know, pay everyone a working wage and let's see who really stays together out of love when it's all said and done in the end. And of course, you know, I'm big on paid paternity and maternity leave because that would also take a lot of pressure off of new parents. But rape is a different story, and I do think, so you're talking about the Brock Turner case, and it's worth noting that the judge who presided over that case, who gave the slap on the wrist sentence, he is facing a recall in this upcoming election. So, you know, I do think that this is something that we're starting to see people push back on. There are police stations that have a bunch of untested rape kits. And as newspapers have brought that to light, once again, you're seeing citizens saying this isn't what we elected you for. So I do think, especially in the world of like sexual assault and sexual violence, that we should hold public officials more accountable to these types of crimes than what they have been previously. And you're right, that is something that we often don't think about when we think about in terms of the impacts of masculinity, but I think both of those were really good examples.
I think part of it is we just need to elect better leaders. We just do.
That's very true, and a lot of the times you just, you know, it has to come to light, and then we don't realize it until they're up there, and then it's like, what do we do now? So now we're going to move to the next question really quick.
Oh yeah, sure. I just wanted to make point that if our value system is off, then there seems to be repercussions as a result of that. And one of the things that I think often doesn't get spoken about is, you know, the reward system, going back to the gentleman in the back. You know, if political leaders, even the person who's the president of the United States, is allowed to have values demonstrated through his actions that are inappropriate, it sends a loud and clear message. It even reinforces those boxes. And I think that's something that really needs to be considered. We can't make change or ask people to change if they're seeing reflections of success or the values reflected in these individuals as appropriate. So I think that's something that we need to think about. Like, when we ask people to change, they have to have the support to change, but we also have to have the people who are in positions of power to also be prepared to make changes.
Yeah. We're looking at young men and wanting them to reevaluate their behavior, right? And telling them that this isn't okay. And then at the same time, on the TV behind us, they're seeing this stuff come out of the highest leader in the land. And so there's got to be some internal confusion there, like seeing this. And so, yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that, and that's part of it, which is to my other point, elect better leaders.
And I think also going off of that, you're absolutely right. We have this person who's supposed to be helping lead this country, but you also have someone like DeVos who is, education and all of this, and that's this Title IX and wanting to just repeal how everything's been happening, and a campus shouldn't have a process on their own. They should only go the criminal justice route. Well, lots of the survivors that myself and I'm sure Michael see don't even want to go into court. That's traumatizing for someone to have to do. So that's a woman who should empathize much more with the majority of survivors who are coming forward identify as female, yet here she is saying, you know what, maybe it's really not that important. So again, elect better leaders and let's hold one another accountable. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then just so we can finish on time, we're going to have our last question.
Thank you. One of the things I picked up from the presentation and the panel is how important language is. And I was specifically, one of the examples was the man and the woman box. With how binary that is, do you think that contributes to the way we talk about politics and just general discourse in this country? And if you have any comments, I would be very interested. Thank you very much for your time.
Definitely. I mean, when you treat gender as being a gender binary, you're either this or you're that. And you ignore the fact, they use the word continuum, you ignore the fact that it's a continuum, it forces people towards these kind of extreme levels of behavior, right? Because it makes it seem like there are no positions in the middle that you can take. And that's still the case even today when we are more aware of terms like, being bigender or being gender fluid or being gender queer. But for most of us, it's a very binary kind of view of society. And it can make it, I think you used the term risk before, and it makes it more risky, especially for men, to step outside of the man box, because if you aren't in the man box, there aren't these other boxes, right? There's only one other box, and it's the one that we have objectified and have said this is a lower status box. So, in a perfect society, wouldn't it be great if there were like 100 boxes, or there were no boxes at all, and you could just be like free floating? I think that would allow people to be more unique to themselves and would really disrupt the system. But I'll be honest, what we do to get there as a society, have no clue.
To me, the languaging is extremely important. I mean, I come from a profession where probably a significant portion of the work I do is about language and ideas. So much of the conceptualization of who we are and the way we construct our reality is based around language. And the way that we speak about things really is about how we identify ourselves, who we include in our group, how we identify with the other, and that pretty much has a lot of biology that then comes with it, that is very difficult to fight against. There's plenty of social psych studies where you have people that are in the out group, and then one task can then bring them into the in group. And a lot of that is about language and conceptualization, and most of the change, I would say within feminism and kind of changing some of that, a lot of that was around languaging and the way that we talk about these issues. So I would say that that's absolutely critical, and that some of that, how that changes, is people change their use of language and the way they talk. That has a profound impact on the way that people then view the world.
Okay, and with that, I think we have come to an end with a great panel. I would first like to thank the panelists for being here. It was a great pleasure having you here. And all of you who attended the event, thank you. I hope you really enjoyed it. But before we go, I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. So as you know, myself and Danny, we're both we're both graduate student leaders at the MAGIC Center, which stands for Multicultural Alliance and Gender Equity Research Center. So we are there, and we are open Monday through Friday. You can, call us if you guys have any questions. You guys can drop in. And, our plan for that center is just to make it a welcoming space for anybody who wants to talk about anything. We have a lounge area that you can sit there, you can take a nap, you can study, you can do anything you want in the lounge area, as long as it's legal. So, but yeah, we really want to make that space a safe space for you to come in. So even with this topic, if you have anybody or yourself that wants to talk about masculinity and how you're feeling, anything of that, you're more than welcome to talk to us. or you want to go even with a friend and you want to have a private conversation, we have a conference room that you can probably go in there and then nobody will bother you. So we can make it work. And with that, I would like to thank everybody again. And do you have anything else to say, Danny? Okay. And I would like to thank the library, especially Teresita, for helping us in collaboration with this event. We hope to collaborate later on in the future. And I know there's an equivalent part of film very similar to this that talks about femininity and about females. So maybe we can do that for a different event.
And yeah, kind of just piggybacking off of what he said, thank you again to all the students and faculty, everyone who was out here today, who was here a part of this presentation. We really hope that it was a very insightful and thoughtful conversation that needed to be had. Thank you, Teresita, as part of the CSUB Library, for this collaboration, allowing us the space and the collaboration here. We hope you enjoy the resource table that she put together in the back with other books and resources that the library has provided on this topic. But that we hope that you come to Magic as well. We're located in Rohan, which is in the Housing West back there. We hope to see you soon. And if we could have a round of applause, please, for our panelists. Thank you for coming.